We're good?
There it is.
Hey, church. So we're having more internet difficulties here. It seems to be the
Is that turned off?
normal. No, I didn't turn this off yet. Thanks for reminding me. Seems to be the normal thing as of lately, but we're working on it. So thank you for your patience with us. We are working through a lot of seemingly issues here. So, but we're live and good now. Is that correct? You should be. All right, good. That's nice to hear.
All of our internet woes should be solved on Friday, right?
We hope so. We hope they'll all be solved on Friday. So, anyway.
So, hey, nobody here's flustered or anything.
Oh, no, not at all. Oh, my gosh. That's almost like the
There's that.
There's that. Every week. And there we go. Okay.
Attributes of God, huh? How about those?
Yeah, I'm trying to find one of myself at this very moment. So. All right. Hi, Melissa. Hi, Mary. It's nice to see you guys with us tonight. Tonight, our topic is the attributes of God. And it is going to be our Sunday sermon series for the next several weeks as we walk through several attributes of God. A.W. Tozer, he identifies 23, and so we might use his book as kind of a guide. And the name of that book, if you're interested, is The Knowledge of the Holy. He lays out 23 attributes of God that he explores, and that we might use as kind of our guide as we go through the study, as well as adding others to it and all. So thank you for joining us tonight. And so tonight's going to be kind of an introduction to our discussion on the attributes of God. And then each week, like this Sunday, we'll take an attribute. I'll be teaching about it. Next week, we'll unpack it a little bit. We'll talk about how to apply it to our lives a little bit, or what's problematic about it. Because in every sermon, whether it's 30 minutes or 45 minutes, most sermons will never give you the amount of time you need or to really draw out all the nuances of a particular topic. So that's why it's going to be great to have the opportunity to use Wednesday nights to draw more meaning and more application, more practical application for our topic and all. So, Jared is still trying to make sure that we're running over here, and Steve is just dying to say something. So, there we go. Okay, good.
Steve's never really dying to say anything.
He's not? Well,
if you know Steve.
No, he's been really kind of surprising us lately. Steve has been with some of the things he's been doing. And yeah, no, I think he is going to preach soon.
No. Don't start that.
So, all right. So, attributes of God. So when we talk about attributes of God, the character of God, what kind of things are we talking about?
Patience.
I guess I'll talk.
God's patience. God's patience. Very good. That's probably a very good one there.
Jared's all out of breath.
Good.
We read chapters 1 and chapter 2 in the Knowledge of the Holy to prepare for this discussion, and all the way at the end. Let me see if it was at the end of 1 or 2. I think it was at the end of 1,
Both
maybe, where he really defines. No, it's at the end of 2. At the end of chapter 2, Tozer defines what he means by the attributes of God, and I like it. It's at the end of his chapter on one of his attributes, basically being his incomprehensibility. Basically, he is incomprehensible. So he is unknowable in himself as he truly is, and he talks a lot about that's why the Bible describes that he is like this or he's like that, and over when images the prophets and the apostles, he's like this or he's like that. So because he's unlike anything that we could really compare him to truly as he is, so we have to draw comparisons to things that we can liken him to. We have to draw comparisons to things that we can understand or that we can know. So he is incomprehensible in the sense that we could ever really know all of him, or we could know him as he truly is, I think is the way that he describes it. But the way he defines attributes is he says, while the name of God is secret and his essential nature incomprehensible, he, in condescending love and revelation, declared certain things to be true of himself. These we call his attributes. So his attributes are those things about him that he's chosen to reveal to us about who he is.
So let me just ask you something. One of the things he says, I think it's in this book or somewhere else I read, it's like, the first thing you think about God. When you think about God, like Robert Whitley, he's already jumped in there and he said, like, God is love. So if I were to say God is, what is the first attribute that comes to your mind when we say God is? What is that attribute?
I'd probably say love is the first thing that pops in my. If somebody says God is, love is the one that pops in
Jared,
my mind, because that's.
Are you with us yet? Are you still like
I'm
catching his breath.
catching my
Someone
breath
get him
over
a brown paper bag he can breathe into over here. What would you say if you were to say God is? What's that first attribute of God that you think of?
here. Maybe like his faithfulness.
Faithful. See, that's what I think of too, and I know that's what I think of, because whenever I'm praying, I nearly always say, God, thank you for your faithfulness. It's just, I can't steer away from it. It just comes out very naturally. So here we have a few other. Rob Quanstrom says holy, and Ellen says omnipotent. Celia says forgiving.
I don't know if it meant to, but Rob's holy showed up twice on my thing. It says holy.
Same.
So on mine it says holy, holy. I feel like you should.
Do it one more
Put
time, Rob.
one-
Post
we
holy
need
one
one
more
more.
time, and then you'll be like a hymn, holy, 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 or
I
a
think
revelation.
one that I do think of, like off the top of my head, that I don't think we talk about often, at least in church. I've never heard it taught.
It's going to be this time.
His immutability. I really, I've taught that at youth group, and the importance of his immutability, and basically what immutability is. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. He's the God of the Old Testament, is the God of the New Testament, is the God of today. He has not changed. And there are a lot of practical implications of understanding that. Why is that important?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jack Haverly told me that one of the best one of the best discussions they had in their small group was when they discussed the immutability of God. Yeah. So, all right. So Grace is sitting over here. Grace, what is the first attribute of God you think of? His otherness. Is that in this book?
I don't know.
I don't know. All right.
Maybe.
Otherness. What do you mean by otherness? Unlike us, that he is unlike us. Well, that is in this book. That's what this chapter talked about, that he is so unlike us that all the prophets had to use, like you said a moment ago, they were doing the very best they could describe something they had no words for.
Yeah, sort of what he ties that into his incomprehensibility. The fact that he is other. He is so unlike anything that we can comprehend. That we do the best that we can to try to describe what he's like, but at the end of the day, we really can't even understand what he's like, because we have nothing to compare him to. There really is nothing to compare
Right.
him to in his essence, and all that he truly is. There is nothing else like him.
Right.
That would be his otherness.
Yeah,
that
his
he
otherness.
stands alone
Right.
as the sum total of his attributes, and there can be nothing like him.
Right. So, I really appreciate. I'm kind of use his outline for our point of discussion tonight, unless someone else has a little bit whatever you want to do with it and all. But I really appreciate that he talks about how the reason we need to know what God is really like is because we will always reduce him to what we know and understand. And we will reduce him down to being like us.
Mm-hmm.
And he draws out on one of the verses where it talks about that that whenever man is made an idol, he always makes it like a man or an animal, 4-footed, with wings, with tails, because that's the only thing we know, and so we do it. We can only relate to him in a way that we understand, and he talks a lot about the idolatrous heart,
Mm-hmm.
and how our heart will always try to reduce God down to man's terms, and in that we always make him something unworthy of worship.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I liked what he said about in that part. I think where you're at talking about
On page 11. is where-
idolatry.
Yeah.
Oh, that's my page 5.
Oh,
I
never
think.
mind. Yeah, I can't do that, can we? Well, that messes things up, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think we all three have different
We do have three
Copies.
different editions of it, yeah.
of the book, but but if we're in the same place as where he's talking about Romans 1:21, I
Right.
think kind of toward the end of chapter 1. This is the essence of idolatry, is the entertainment of thoughts about God that are unworthy of him. It
Right.
begins in the mind and may be present where no overt act of worship has taken place. And then he quotes Romans 1:21. When they knew God, wrote Paul, they glorified him not as God, neither were they thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. He said, and so then Tozer goes on and says, then followed the worship of idols fashioned after the likeness of men and birds and beasts and creeping things. But this series of degrading acts began in the mind. Wrong ideas about God are not only the fountain from which the polluted waters of idolatry flow, they are themselves idolatrous.
Yeah.
So
That's
it's not
crazy.
just that those wrong thoughts about God lead to idolatry. Those wrong thoughts about God, he says, are idolatrous in and of themselves because they are wrong about God.
Well,
We don't think about him as he truly is.
Right.
We think about him as some other way, and so that's not who he is, and so that would be idolatrous.
Well, he closes out that passage that you touch on. He says, the idolater simply imagines things about God and acts as if they're true.
Yeah. Yeah. Which makes it really important to try to get it right, what we know and what we believe about God.
Yeah. 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 I loved what Grace Kane said earlier. Grace, will you repeat for us what you said about your college course on the attributes of God and how it was mind-opening for you? Will you repeat that for me?
It created so many questions for me that it humbled me more than taught me big words or big ideas.
Right. She said that it created so many questions in her mind that it humbled her about that. Say that part again. That it humbled you as you realized how big he was
Yes, and how little we are.
and how little we are. Yeah.
Stop asking so many questions.
Yeah. Yeah. And that when the way she says that, it reminds me immediately of, like, I think it's Job 38.
Job.
Yeah. When God begins to take Job and says, "Where were you? How do you know this?" And he really creates that distance between God and man in a pretty stark manner,
Mhm.
you know. And that would even be a pretty interesting study in his attributes from that passage. What are the attributes that he calls out about himself, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
So-
I think he goes for 2 chapters or 3 chapters maybe. There where God is the one speaking.
Yeah.
38, 39, and maybe 40. Might be wrong about that, but so yeah, there's probably a lot there that to draw out of what he says about himself, and to match it up to our list of attributes and say he's
Yeah.
this way or that way.
There's some homework if you're out there listening, watching. Like, take those passages out of Job and pull the attributes out of it and see what he says about himself and what attributes you find in Job 38, 39, and if he goes into 40, that'd be a pretty good Bible study to be doing if you want to look and study ahead about the attributes of God and all. So, one of the things that he says in here, that I really appreciated was that our idea of God may lie buried under the rubbish of conventional religious notions that require intelligence and vigorous search before it is finally unearthed and exposed to be what it really is. And he's talking about how lame our
Mhm.
ideas are about God. And to what you said earlier, he really is incomprehensible. And yet in John he says that that when we see Jesus we see God, that Christ reveals him to us, So
And so that's
Rob Quantum says God's transcendence. He's always there, even when the internet goes down.
Yeah. He was here the whole time.
Thank goodness for that. Oh man. What else? What are some other comments or thoughts you have about our initial reading about the?
Well, I think we should talk a little bit more about why
Good.
we're even doing this.
Yeah.
Why talk about it tonight? Why spend the next several nights
Yeah.
talking about this? Why would you give a sermon series to it? You know, I mean, some people might say, well, we know that God loves us. We know that he's saved us. Isn't that enough? You know, and that is, that's that kind of simple faith, which I might argue that's not really what a simple faith is referring to, but somebody might say that's a simple faith to know that God loves me and that Jesus died for me, and that's really all I need to be able to worship God.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. No, I really think that it is a more complete understanding. Really puts us like in an understanding of him more completely. You know, and I was talking with someone today about that because, you know, there are many people who, I mean, it's kind of like the thing about, you know, a loving God can never send anyone to hell. You know, and that's exactly what he's saying in these opening chapters of the book. It's that when we say that a loving God can never send anyone to hell, what we're doing is we're evaluating God by a human standard. Mm-hmm. And so we're looking at him at our standard, like going, this is what love looks like for humans. But love looks very different for God. Mm-hmm. You know, and not only that, but, you know, it's something that Doug Perry said a moment ago. His attributes and characteristics are never separated from the others. So his love is equally bound to his justice, and is equally bound to his wrath, and equally bound to, you know, his wisdom and his sovereignty, and his compassion. And we cannot balance all those things out, and it ultimately leaves us kind of what I think what Grace said a moment ago was that it leaves us with a lot of questions about, like, this God is really an amazing God because he's far beyond what I can understand. Mm-hmm. You know, but anyway, like when we begin to evaluate God by our standards, we come to a place where I think it's pretty natural or understandable to think that a loving God could not send someone to hell. But when you look at it from the other way around, and you look at it from the aspects of a holy God, it's amazing that anyone gets into heaven. You know, from his vantage point, it's like, it's not that a loving God will let anyone go to hell. It's that a holy God would let anyone into heaven. Mm-hmm. And that's the right perspective. Mm-hmm. And when we study his attributes, those are the conclusions that we come to, and those are the understandings of him that we come to, so that we begin to relate to him in a more right way, you know. So what other examples do you guys think of that when you come to understand his attributes, you begin to understand him in a better way?
I don't know. That's probably the first one that.
Well,
I'm sure I could think of others, but that's the one that pops into my head.
Right. I took the easiest one.
Yeah,
Sorry about that.
Yeah, it really is the easiest one, because you hear that all the time. You know, people who people who would try to discredit the Christian message, but also from people who would claim to be Christians themselves, but have such a misunderstanding of God. Sometimes it makes you go, like, I don't think we're worshiping the same God.
Yeah.
You know, somebody who would, several years ago, there was had been a popular pastor at one time, and it kind of went off the rails, I believe, and then started teaching that there was no such thing as hell. Just, you know, denied the existence of hell altogether, because, you know, it was kind of this idea taken to its extreme that God is love and love wins. And so, you know, no one goes to hell. There's like a temporal punishment, but at the end of the day, everyone, you know, no one stays there forever.
Right.
Because there's no such thing as an eternal punishment, because that would be too cruel for God. And that denies and rejects so much scripture and so much about God's character when balanced out, when you take all these things together, his holiness and wrath and justice, and you look at all those things, the way that they relate to each other. I look at that and go, that's not, if that's your God, that's not the God of the Bible. That's not the God that I read about. And so, I think it's important to understand his attributes and his characteristics and who he is and how these things relate together and how they fit together. Because while he is incomprehensible in his, in his true form, his true essence, we can't really understand. We could never comprehend all of who he is. He has revealed so much about himself, and he's done it in such a way that, yes, we can come to him simply, and our faith should be faith of a child, but not a childish faith. We can't remain in a childish faith forever where we just say,
That's a great,
you know what, I
great
don't like
statement.
this. I don't like that part of God, so I just block that out.
That's a great
And
statement.
I'm just going to focus on this part.
Yeah.
And that's what children do when they don't like something. It's just you throw a fit or whatever, and you kind of block that out and you focus on what you do like. And the Bible doesn't give us that luxury.
Right.
It presents us with a picture of a very complex God, a God who would have to be complex, but it gives us a very complex God. And so it's okay for us to say, I don't understand how all these things work, but we do have to acknowledge that he is all of those things. He is love. He loves sinners, but yet he also hates sinners. Those are both biblical concepts. And just because we can't understand how he can love sinners and hate sinners at the same time doesn't mean they're both not true.
Right. Because he's God, yeah. So this is where you ought to be able to chime in right now because of, let's pull the worship string and see what he says tonight. Because, any one of these attributes, when they're fully understood, is worthy of, the response should be worship, But then, many would define glory as being the sum total of all of his attributes and all. And so, what would you say? I mean, isn't that what you would say, as the worship guy, that understanding these attributes should spark worship from his followers?
Yeah. I think he had a quote in here that I think directly talks about that in chapter 2 from Frederick Faber, that these things, these infinitely large, lofty ideas are darkness to the intellect, but sunshine to the heart.
Yeah.
And I think when we talk about the importance of these things, when I think about, his transcendence, his eminence, his aseity, his immutability, his, eternality, all these things, that it sparks in us a desire to want to know those things more, to honestly seek them, to seek the Lord, to seek his face, like the Psalms talks about. But it should spark a constant chasing, and I think that's kind of what Paul alludes to a little bit when he's like, I run the race to win the prize. Runners run for like a perishable wreath, something that fades, but I run for the beloved one, for the Lord, to know him more. So I think these things have explicit daily realities in our life that when we begin,
they should.
They should.
Yeah.
When we begin to understand them and when we begin to know them, we begin to understand that the things of this world and the processes of this world are not our own. They aren't. We're not of the government's business. Like, that's just not, like, we have one goal. Like, we have one goal, we have one gospel, one ideal, which is to know Christ and make him known. That's the one thing we have to know. All things are secondary, And so when we begin to know Christ, these are the things we start to begin to know about the Lord, to know about God, the character of the Son, the character of the Father, the character of the Holy Spirit, God himself. It should drive us to thirst more for him, but also to make known the kingdom of God even more and more. And I think when we fail to do that, we fail in our worship. And and ultimately we fail in evangelism. Like,
Yeah, I agree.
not to quote, to quote John Piper, evangelism exists because worship doesn't. That's the end of the day. Like, if people honestly, like if the church honestly unpack these things daily, like the implications of them and how they interacted with our lives, and like you're like, well, how does his aseity, like what is he even aseity? His self-existence, his self-sufficiency.
That he needs nobody.
He needs no one
Nothing.
at all. That has serious implications on, like, why is that important to him? Like, why is that important to us? Why is that important to now when the world is actually falling apart? Because the one who is self-sufficient in all things continues to hold it all together. Because we, on a consistent basis, don't. Because every day on Facebook, I straight sin. Like, I just want to punch someone in the face. Because I believe that my self-existence is dependent on somebody else's. That's just how humans work. And so, but when we understand these lofty ideas, when we understand his immutability, like his unchangeable nature, like who he is, like he actually has not changed. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is our God. I don't think we if we just like
We don't know how to think that.
Yeah, just put down the phone, like close your eyes for a second. The same God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the one we worship now in entirety. That is a crazy, lofty, like, ideal to even think about, like, just that. And then because of his immutability, like, he doesn't change. His yes is yes and his no is no. That means you're saved. When you come to profess Christ as Lord and Savior, that's it.
Yeah.
And he's going to work on you, and he's going to change you, and he's going to conform you, and it's going to hurt, and he's going to dig out deep roots in your life where it's going to really suck. But the immutable nature of God is that he forever loves his children all the time, no matter any case. And so these are like...
And that what you described there is a great practical reason for understanding that characteristic of God.
Yeah.
Eternal security.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of probably many things. Like that's one of the things that I talked about in youth group when I taught them about when I went through the attributes of God. And we talked about his immutability, and we talked about why is that so important? Or for a teenager, it's immensely important because they go about their day, like emotions change from like minute to minute, especially when a lot of us and even adults are on Instagram all the time.
That way.
Yeah, we change literally all the time. Our feelings about our loved ones change all the time. Like our feelings about this person and our relationships change all the time. And, you feel unloved a lot of times. And a lot of times the world is lonely. But there's one constant, is that God doesn't. And that is crazy.
Amen.
That is insane. Like, but
Yeah, all these attributes are not they're not just big words, and they're not just ideas for pastors or Bible scholars to study. They're all practical. They all have a practical application, and that should come out over the course of the next few weeks on Sunday morning and here on Wednesday nights. But that's Tozer kind of introduces that idea in, I don't know if this is, where am I at, if I'm in chapter 1 or even in the preface. I guess it's in chapter 1 here, but he talks about how a right conception of God is basic not only, he says, to systematic theology. So it is basic to systematic theology, but you begin to put together a picture of who God is, who he really is, in as much as we can understand that according to his word and what's been revealed. But he says a right conception of God is basic not only to systematic theology, but to practical Christian living as well. And so he says it is to worship what the foundation is to the temple. Where it is inadequate or out of plumb, the whole structure must sooner or later collapse. He says, I believe there's scarcely an error in doctrine or a failure in applying Christian ethics They cannot be traced finally to imperfect and ignoble thoughts about God.
Mm-hmm.
The man who comes to a right belief about God is relieved of 10,000 temporal problems.
Yeah.
For he sees at once that these have to do with matters which, at the most, cannot concern him for very long.
Mm.
And I heard somebody say one time, I don't know if it was a famous, a famous quote, or if I just heard it in passing, but it's always stuck with me. Somebody told me one time that every problem is a theological problem. And the idea of it was that what he said, what I think that we're getting at, that every problem, everything that we, every situation that we come up against will test something about what we believe about God. And so it's a matter of our theology and what we believe about God. How who God is applies to that situation that we're in.
And can you imagine it? Because like so many times, we so often think through, or we so often run to the promises of God. So for instance, the one that I think is most readily at the forefront of many people's minds is that my peace I give you, not like the world gives you, but, or that he gives a peace that's, out of Philippians that is, incomprehensible. You can't imagine it.
Yeah.
Or he, and even what he says here is that when you come to a right understanding of God, you come to that understanding of peace. And not only do you come to an understanding of it, you experience it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the promises of God are made real in the understanding of God.
Yeah, this is how Paul says things like these light momentary afflictions.
Right.
While he's been shipwrecked and he's been beaten and he's been within a couple inches of death, and he's been, 2 Corinthians 12, I think, where he goes through and he lists out this whole long, these are all this has been my life. And it's like a terrible list that none of us want to experience even
that's why I became
portion
a
of
Christian,
it.
that kind of thing, right? Yeah.
But then elsewhere, he says things like, this light momentary affliction is what he calls it. He compares it to an eternal weight of glory. This is basically like, if you understand who God is,
right.
if you understand what's
excellent
coming,
observation.
If you understand what's waiting for you, then all of these things are and that's not to make light of them. It's not to say that they're not difficult. It's not to say
that they really hurt.
It's not to say that the pain is not real, or that it's it doesn't minimize any of the suffering that we experience. But in comparison to who God is, in comparison to seeing him face to face one day, in comparison to seeing Jesus one day, that stuff is, it's light, it's momentary, it's almost nothing in comparison. So there should be some perspective that we get from that too in those verses. If you think the tremendous suffering sometimes that we experience here, and to say that in comparison to Jesus, that is like nothing.
It puts it in perspective, is what he's... Yeah.
How glorious, how majestic, how amazing must God be to take some of the worst suffering that we could ever endure and say, compared to him, compared to what's waiting for us, it's nothing. Light, momentary, nothing.
Right. Yeah, I don't understand that.
I think that's one of the things that the church, at least in my very small, minimal experience, has failed at, in a way that...
Making God God?
Yeah. I have heard so many sermons, to take Vodi Balcom's words, like a sissified Jesus, like a sissified God. And in the sense that we diminish him to just this basic, universal love, which isn't wrong, but it's only just such a small portion of the picture.
It's incomplete.
It's super incomplete. And then we we push this, and then I've had so many friends and so many students, youth students that I've seen over the years that have just completely left the faith, like totally renounce everything because God wasn't who they were told he was.
Right, exactly. I've
And-
preached that
and
several
it's
times.
so-
Exactly.
It's so disturbing, and it's disorienting for them and for us. And I can't help but kind of like look at maybe the church's response to many of the things happening today and why this is so important today, like as opposed to every other year. Like 2020, we can all agree, is like a crapshoot of a year. It's pretty bad. It's really bad. I'm waiting for Godzilla to come out of the Pacific Ocean or like Galactus as something. And it's crazy, but really the importance of understanding who God is now amongst this craziness. Not like, and I'm not talking like, well, our God is a Republican, or our God is a Democrat, or let's just like universally love everyone, And I'm like,
Would he be an independent?
no, not even I don't think he'd be anything.
Independence. That's got to be an attribute, right?
Independence. Yeah.
Independence. I'm not going there, but I'm going to say that I think we do a huge disservice to God and to the church when we don't give credence and we dim and diminish the glory of God to just things that we think God should be or has been in our life by experience, and not give the real facts about who he is in his totality, because that is a huge disservice for future generations. And Tozer says that. He says it, I think in the end of chapter 1, he says it this way. He says, the heaviest obligation lying upon the Christian church today is to purify and elevate her concept of God until it is once more worthy of him
Yeah.
and of her. So not just of God,
Yeah.
but that we worship a God that's worthy. So, and of her. In all her prayers and labors, this should have first place. We do the greatest service to the next generation of Christians by passing on to them, undimmed and undiminished, that noble concept of God which we received from our Hebrew and Christian fathers of generations past. This will prove of greater value to them than anything that art or science can even devise.
Right.
Yeah.
Really well said.
And I think I love that because I've seen it so often. I've seen the opposite of that so many times and so often. And I think it's so important today, like more than any other year, to understand who God is now, because when things get worse and when things are super difficult and maybe COVID-19 turns into COVID superbug or whatever and kills massive amounts of people, or when somebody gets attacked by rioters and looters and dies, and like that's serious. That shakes somebody's world about who God is, and to understand who he is right now, I think more than any other year is so important and is completely necessary on how we live our lives.
But I agree with you, and that's the reason why I want to do this study. And I told you guys that, and we were prepared to this, is that I believe the pressure on Christians is going to continue to grow and grow and grow, regardless of political forces. It's just the nature of the world and the culture. And the
That's what
culture
was prophesied.
Right. And so as pressure continues to grow on Christians to cause them to doubt or even encourage them to walk away from their faith, I believe that if we have a right and proper perspective of God, two things are going to happen. One is that some people look at him and go, I don't want that. I don't want a God that says I have to love my enemies. I won't partake. Because I'm going to hate my enemy. And so therefore I don't want that part of God. I don't want anything to do with him. But that right there is the exact reason why you have so many strange and bizarre heresies and so many false doctrines, is because people still want to be about God, and so they create other theories about God, and they say this is what God's like. And that's why you say when you, like today I was talking with someone, when you have people who want to believe in annihilism or other things like that, what they've come to is they've come into the truth about God and they refuse to accept it, so they create a mini God or a false or a lie about God, and they worship that. And so we're going to see more and more of that. And then we're also going to see some who will actually, when they're really pressed with these difficulties and the hatred of Christians, they will go, you know what? I can stand up to this because this is who God is. When everything else around me seems to be falling apart and is untrustworthy and is unfaithful and is unloving, I can go back to someone who is always faithful, always loving, always holy, is eternal, has given me hope even in the midst of the darkest situation I can have. When we give people that in our church, we will have people who will one day be pressed and will fall back on that knowledge and draw it out of them in such a way that they will stand in the face of adversity that they never dreamed they could, because they're believing right things about God. You know, and to your point earlier, I really do believe that that's true, because that's even why I walked away for a few years when I was 21, is that I couldn't reconcile what I thought I learned about the church with my mother's death, with my father's alcoholism, with losing our home, and with all the stuff that happened in about 6 months there. What I thought I learned in church could not reconcile with my experience. And so what we want to do as a church is to help people understand God so that they can reconcile their experience with what God's really like. And who he really is. And so my intent, I even wrote this down. So this right here, this is what it says. My intent for this entire series is to put God where he belongs and to elevate our understanding of him. You know, that's the goal of this study. You know, and in that, I think that you'll have more people who worship with you on a Sunday morning, and more wholehearted, and it'll be more in their lifestyle. And I think we're going to have people who are going to take that verse about taste and see that he is good. They will be pushed to the limits that they will fall on him like they've never fallen on him before. And they will find that he is faithful, that he is holy, that he is, all these characteristics of him are true. And in the light of a world where there is hardly any truth left, they will cling to something that is true, but they will have to fall on him and give up everything to experience him in that way and to learn that about him.
That's why he says in the preface, and we were only supposed to read chapters 1 and 2, but I read the preface too.
Well,
so I'm an overachiever.
that's the way people like you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's only like 3 pages. So he wrote this book in 1961.
Right.
So 60 years ago. And he says the reason that he wrote it, the message of this book is called forth by a condition which has existed in the church for some years and is steadily growing worse. And so in the 60 years, he died 2 years after this. I think he died in 63.
Yeah.
And so he's probably just would be spinning right now if he could see what's happened since then. But he says even up to that point, he refers, his diagnosis, or the reason he wrote the book, he says basically, he's referring to the loss of the concept of majesty from the popular religious mind. That's really where he sort of boils down to. This is why I'm writing a book about the attributes of God and about who God is in his character and nature, because we have lost the concept of his majesty. So to have him kind of, like you said, kind of high and lifted up, and to put him back in that right place where he belongs. He says the church has surrendered her once lofty concept of God and had substituted for it one so low, so ignoble as to be utterly unworthy of thinking, worshiping men. This she has not done deliberately, but little by little, and without her knowledge, and her very unawareness only makes her situation all the more tragic. The low view of God entertained almost universally among Christians is the cause of 100 lesser evils everywhere among us.
Right. I thought that was
going
a great
back to
statement.
that idea that, you know, we what we think about God informs our behavior and informs how we act. And then further down, he says, which I think this speaks to something that you were saying just a few minutes ago, it's impossible to keep our moral practices sound and our inward attitudes right while our idea of God is erroneous or inadequate.
Right.
And so this is important because what we believe about God, what we think about him always informs the way that we act. And so I could think of a lot of different examples right now of how wrong ideas about who God is lead people to these actions that some of us, I think, and I'm probably guilty of it somewhere too. But I can think of some blatant ones where we would hear somebody teach something, or we see what somebody's doing in the name of Christianity, and we'd say, that's not what the Bible teaches. That's the opposite of what the Bible teaches. Where does that even come from?
Yeah.
But that's what Tozer's saying. Like, it's impossible to have right moral actions without right beliefs about who God is and his character.
Right.
And what's interesting that you say that is that I came across a quote from several years ago, actually, and I reposted it today, and it's a quote by James Garfield, and he talks about that moral men should keep their governments moral, but the less moral men become, the less moral your government becomes.
Right.
And I've preached that before, and I firmly believe that the government we have is a result of the people we are. And that the larger the disconnect between the character of God or even biblical morality to our government and society, the more you can see this fall apart. Capitalism is great when it's based on some moral basis, but apart from a moral basis, capitalism will always abuse other people. Democracy is the same way. And so, all these things that are great and were good at one time in our society, they continue to become less good and evil as they become further and further away from biblical morality, And the other thing that that you mentioned that I really that he said there and I really like is that the way I kind of think about sin and pride, that the original sin was, Lucifer's pride, and he says, "I will be like you," and I feel like that when he said that, he meant without constraint. God answers to nobody, and Lucifer was kind of like, "I'll be like that. I want no constraints. I don't want anyone to tell me what to do. I'm going to be like you." And then Adam and Eve come up and go, "We don't want to be told what to do either. We want to be in control." And he makes this thing. He says, "Left to ourselves, we tend to immediately reduce God to manageable terms. We want to get him where we can use him, or at least know where he is when we need him. We want a God we can, in some measure, control. We need the feeling of security that comes from knowing that what God is like, and that we have defined him." And I think there's just so much truth to that. That that heresy is one that says that I can define God in a way that I like him, and it works with my theology, and my understanding of what I want God to be like and all.
Yeah.
So, all right, we're coming up against our time here. So
we started a little late.
We started late, but
so what are any kind of closing thoughts or anything like that you want to throw in here before we kind of close?
I think I said a little bit this past Sunday when we were live streaming church, is that admittedly, life for me in this time it's been pretty difficult. I think for all of us in various ways, like everything from quarantining for the 15 days that they said to doing it for what, 5 months now? 5 months?
Who's counting?
I don't know. But that's nothing to scoff at. That's a long time that impacts the soul. People are we talked about a little about the importance of the gathering. Really, you want a big understanding of God? That requires being a part of something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
And live stream church doesn't cut it. And so, the gathering of people, why is it so important to sing when we're together? And why and I've said this admittedly, I'm frustrated with our setup right now because when we're live stream, I can't hear anybody saying. When we're outside, everybody sits 5 years away from the stage.
5 light years.
five whole, yeah. And I can't hear anybody sing still. But the importance of hearing each other singing these truths is a deeper understanding collectively of who God is, and us declaring that over each other and then to Him.
Yeah.
You know, and that has profound impacts on our knowledge and understanding of God. Like that gives us glimpses into who He is, His goodness, right? His perfection, His holiness, His otherness. That's what, holiness is. He's so much other than us, even His, like the things we've talked about, His immutability, His eternality. He's from, like, we sing songs that talk about He has no beginning and no end. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Mm-hmm. His aseity, His self-sufficiency is so much so that He then gives us the security in His self-sufficiency to know that we're His children. Like those are serious, like really emboldening and encouraging things that I think the importance of gathering together.
You're building a house on the
putting it
rock
out.
when you live on that stuff.
Yeah.
And you will not be blown away.
Nope.
And
so I said it this past Sunday in that, not being with the gathering and not, kind of not being encouraged and pushed by people. And we're kind of only getting to some kind of like normal routine-ish thing, is that it's easy to become bored with God when you don't see Him, when things are not going our way, when things are really difficult. But it's not that He's gotten boring. It's that we've forgotten or don't know how to seek Him in His creation and His Word. And I think those are serious things. And I think the importance of, again, just talking about these things and learning about them and encouraging one another and what these things are that much more important. Like infinitely so. These may be like lofty ideas and goals, but they push us in everyday practical living. Like knowing about God's perfection and His immutability and these things that are things that we are not start to shape and shift our minds to things to do things for the kingdom and to do things for other people and to love other people so much more so, like we talked about last week. Like that's what fuels us to do those things.
Yep, I like it. So that's what we're going to be doing for the next several weeks, folks, is we are going to be really digging, like looking at each of these different attributes and learning how they practically apply to our lives, so that when we come to places where we're told that what we believe is false or that what we believe is wrong, and we're even told that by other Christians, So when we're told what we believe is false, when we're told what we believe is wrong, when we're told that what we believe is harmful, we will be able to fall back on the character of God as the bedrock for what we believe, and the character of God for standing us up, for keeping us propped up in the hurricane force winds. It's His character that keeps us propped up and helps us to be able to withstand everything the world would send against us, even our own doubts. It's knowing His character keeps us standing firm. And so that's what we are going to really be studying for the next several weeks, because we are continually told how wrong we are. We're continually told how harmful we are. There is even a post, and this article was in Time or Newsweek, and it goes back several years ago now, that faith is a mental illness, and it should be diagnosed among a mental illness.
The DSM?
Yeah, in the DSM, And so I would only say some people's faith is that, but
maybe.
So anyway, So that's why we're going to be studying what we're studying. So please, I hope you enjoy you join us on Sunday mornings, whether you're live stream or in person, and that you join us here on Wednesday nights, and you invite other people to do it, and you throw in your comments about why that attribute of God is important to you, or even throw in your questions about it. That because the way we learn is by asking questions. So don't ever not ask your questions, and ask questions. And let's be a community that does ask questions, because that's a community that is learning, and a community that's learning is one that's growing. And we want to be growing in our understanding of who He is, and that's what He wants for us. And so, that's what we're going to be doing for the next several weeks. All right.
Should we? I feel like since we've just spent an hour almost talking about this book, and we're going to be in a sermon series talking about God's attributes. I feel like we should encourage people to read this book if they
I'm
want
looking at
to.
2 others. I thought about the same thing too.
Oh, okay.
I'm looking at one you recommended, and then I found another one.
Which one did I recommend?
I don't know the name. I just ordered it. I ordered you one too, by the way.
Yeah, free books.
Yeah.
Oh.
It comes out of your budget.
the little
Don't
booklet?
get excited.
The small one?
Yeah.
No, that
Okay.
comes out of your budget.
Anyway, we are going to make some book recommendations, and it might be Tozer's,
Are we-
Knowledge
I mean,
of
it
the
wouldn't
Holy.
hurt to
Are we-
read
Oh,
it
no, it wouldn't
too.
at all.
Are we doing the book thing again? The resource table?
I don't know.
Y'all need to order Abe
Yeah,
W.
when we
Tozer's
flatten the curve
The
and we
Knowledge
can
of the
start
Holy.
being normal people again, then once the curve is flattened, maybe we'll do that.
Yeah.
Resource table.
When
I
the,
miss it.
When the curve is flattened. So, all right. Thanks for tuning in tonight. And join us next week and invite people. And let's really make Wednesday nights and Sunday mornings a great resource for us growing in Christ and growing in understanding of Him, so that we are a people who stands firm. Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye.